interestingly, aside from Al Franken, lawmakers were a touch less skeptical than they were initially, especially given what this might mean for additional competition for big tech. What were your takeaways?
Well, I think that that particular soundbite by Senator Franken is the entire thing in a nutshell here, which is if the FCC doesn't get jurisdiction on this particular merger, and it may not, because if Time Warner is able to sell away its license or put them in trust or somehow sort of get the FCC license out of the equation here, then the Department of Justice is probably going to have a very difficult time blocking this merger. The FCC is what blocked the Comcast-Time Warner Cable merger, in essence, by going right exactly to what Senator Franken said. Because that merger had to pass a public benefit standard, meaning it actually had to have a tangible public benefit, doing no harm wasn't enough. When the FCC decided they were going to kick that deal to an administrative hearing, that's what doomed that deal. If the FCC doesn't have jurisdiction over this, and clearly that's what AT&T and Time Warner actually believe, that the FCC may not get involved in this at all, I think this deal has a very high likelihood of going through.
Now, interestingly, Mark Cuban made a point that's getting a lot of attention about what it means for Facebook, Apple, Google. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Facebook are 5 of the 7 most valuable companies by market cap in the world, and all have established dominant positions. That is exactly what the Time Warner acquisition, why the Time Warner acquisition for AT&T is an important strategic content acquisition. Alone, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for either to compete with the companies I mentioned. Together, it will still be difficult, but they will have a chance to battle the dominant players and increase consumer choice and competition for consumer attention.
Todd, would you echo that in terms of what fallout from a convergence would be?
Well, with respect, I would disagree with Mr. Cuban. The reality is that the content, the video content in particular that's available on Facebook or on any of the other platforms that he mentioned, doesn't compete. It's not substitutable with the linear programming that's available from the Time Warner media empire. So you have a basic issue of apples and oranges. And the reality is, if you look at this merger for what it is, it's the concentration of too much market power in the hands of one firm with a questionable track record. So we see no reason to approve this merger. We think that it raises tremendous questions about competition, particularly on the over-the-top video marketplace. And to the question of jurisdiction, if ever a merger should be reviewed by the FCC, it's this one, because it touches the video marketplace, it touches broadband, it touches wireless, it touches direct broadcast satellite. There's every reason for the FCC to evaluate this merger, and it's clear that it does not advance the public interest.
Emily, if I can just jump in, one thing that for Mark Cuban also, if you use Mark Cuban's logic there, I think any media merger outside of those two companies that he mentioned would be okay. He seems to be paving the way by saying, look, Google and Facebook are dominating this industry, so pick any two companies, put them together. They're still not going to be as dominant right now as those two companies. You'd have to imagine that regulators probably won't quite buy into that extreme degree of logic while looking at this merger.
Now, there's a question of whether, if this merger is approved, it could lead to a new sort of industry, the emergence of a new industry of tech, media, and telecom players. There is a possibility that they could somehow avoid FCC scrutiny if they sell certain licenses. What are the implications, Todd, if that happens, that the FCC does not have oversight over this?
Well, I think the implications are pretty stark. If firms are allowed to use shell companies and play games to skirt public interest review, we're in a world that's a free-for-all. There will be no rules of the road, and companies will be able to do whatever they can and get away with whatever they can to the detriment of the public interest, to the frustration of competition and innovation, to the harm of consumers. Clearly, this merger raises serious questions about the future of innovation in the country, the future of competition, and the availability of broadband broadly.